show for somebody like Donald Trump who's going to use that platform to lie and to defame. We know who Donald Trump is. We know what he was prepared to say. That shouldn't come as a surprise. But they put him on anyway, and I do think that it is legitimate to ask, whether or not there's going to be, legal jeopardy as a result of all of this. But, I just was struck by the fact that, as I'm watching this, that CNN and others in the media have learned nothing since 2015 and 2016. They have not learned anything about how to cover Donald Trump. To the point about whether or not CNN should cover him. Of course they should cover him. Of course he's newsworthy. But this was not journalism last night. When Jonathan Swan sits down, or Mehdi Hassan sits down and interviews somebody, that is journalism. This was programming of entertainment. This was reality TV. And what a surprise that he dominated the format with lie after lie after lie and all of the invective. And I think that was the depressing moment, when not only is he absolutely unrepentant, but we saw how the voters up in New Hampshire reacted. They laughed. They laughed at a woman who had been sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. They laughed at his jokes. And so we've seen how far he has gone in worsening the culture. At the same time, we're seeing the complete inability of the media to handle somebody like this who is completely unmoored from any standard of ethics, decency, or truth-telling.
Charlie, why do you think they did it?
Unfortunately, I think he did it for many of the same reasons that Fox did it, for ratings. This was the way for them to rebrand themselves. They want to shift. They want to change their positioning. They are perhaps thinking that this is a way to get some of the conservative viewers who might be alienated from Fox right now. And those are the reasons it is cynical. It's incredibly cynical. If they did it because they thought that this was journalism, that they were going to treat Donald Trump like any other candidate, then it was a ghastly misjudgment and terribly naive. Because, as we've said over and over and over again, this is not a normal candidate. We are talking about an indicted, twice impeached, coup-plotting sexual abuser who is known for his verbal incontinence and his ability to use forums like this and to turn them into fire hoses of disinformation, and they did it anyway. So it was either cynical or it was incredibly naive.
Andrew Weissman, the Fox Dominion trial taught us so many important things about defamation law. One, that it is very hard to prevail. But as a former Republican, I thought it was just as interesting that the discovery process showed us what the culture was like inside. And my read on the final determination of what led Fox to settle and to part ways with Tucker Carlson was the reputational bleeding that was happening. And so my questions are less about that very high legal standard for defamation and more around risk management and reputational management. The ratings are expected to be much stronger than anything CNN has done in years, in months, maybe over a year. If they want to make this a regular thing, what is the publication of known falsities the second, third, and fourth time expose CNN to at a risk level?
That is a great question. And what it gets to is whether the legal system is going to be the answer for the problem that we all witnessed last night. It's worth noting, Nicole, that it's not just Dominion that won a defamation claim and showed actual malice against Fox, but that is actually one of the two claims that E. Jean Carroll won on with respect to Donald Trump. So you have two victims who, in civil cases, took many, many years and a lot of tenacity and a lot of money in order to hold people to account, Fox News and Donald Trump. That can't be the answer because it just takes too long. That kind of exposure is something that the timeline doesn't work when you've got an election coming up. And that is something that, yes, CNN does have that risk. And if you are CNN's general counsel, you are thinking about that today, because the issue here is not so much will E. Jean Carroll be able to bring a case against Donald Trump? Of course she could. I doubt she's going to, because she just prevailed, and she just went through an exhaustive trial and was sort of re-victimized. So the idea that she would now do that again. But the other person at the table here is CNN. This is one where they're going to start becoming dangerously close to reckless disregard and actual malice, because they know what he is going to say in advance. And the idea that they created this forum and they had this particular audience, this wasn't just a general audience of voters. This was a select group of sort of Republicans, as if you just said, oh, I'm going to interview Joe Biden and we're only going to invite Democrats. So CNN is exposing itself to potential legal liability, particularly if it does this again and again. But I don't think that can be the answer, because the timeline is too long.
Andrew, let me also read something that was published. This is not an internal communication. It certainly has echoes to some of the things we read in the legal process that yielded discovery of internal communications. But this was published. This is from CNN's Reliable Sources newsletter last night, written by Oliver Darcy. He writes this, quote, Trump lied about the 2020 election. He took no responsibility for the January 6th insurrection that those very lies incited. And he mocked E. Jean Carroll's allegations of sexual assault, which a jury found him liable for on Tuesday. And CNN aired it all. On and on it went. It felt like 2016 all over again. It was Trump's unhinged social media feed brought to life on stage. And Collins was put in an uncomfortable position, given that the town hall was conducted in front of a Republican audience that applauded Trump, giving a sense of unintended endorsement to his shameful antics. I am, obviously a female anchor at a media company. I cannot think of any circumstance where my employers would put me in a position where I interviewed somebody who called me nasty and the audience applauded, and then the head of the newsroom would say this the next morning on an all-team call. This is Chris Licht. The chairman of CNN, Chris Licht, issued a robust defense on Thursday of his decision to broadcast a live town hall with former President Trump, an unruly, embracing event that has prompted criticism inside and outside the network. On a network-wide editorial call, Licht congratulated the monitor, Caitlin Collins, on a masterful performance before acknowledging the backlash, public backlash. We all know covering Trump is messy and tricky, and it will continue to be messy and tricky, but it's our job, Licht said. I absolutely unequivocally believe America was served very well by what we did last night. It is our job to cover Trump. It is our job to never look away. I feel like I stare at the sun for 2 hours every single day. It's not what this was. This wasn't covering Trump. Caitlin Collins actually does it better than just about anybody, but that's not what she was doing. She was, for the first few minutes at least, trying to push back against lies. And then he called her nasty, and the crowd applauded. That is what was platformed last night.
Well, there are a couple of things. One, the format here reveals what CNN was trying to do. Like, there was no reason it had to be a town hall, and a town hall with just Republicans. I mean, you could see what they were goading and what they were trying to do. To me, they're a handmaiden to his malignancy. And the quote that you had where he said, well, we need to have Republican voices. I mean, that's not what this was either. Of course you should have Republican voices and Democratic voices and independent voices. Of course that's the case. This is a democracy and people should be heard, and that's part of a news organization. But the way that you've got somebody who is going to lie and defame, you have to structure that. If you are going to view that as news, you have to structure it in a way that you can actually hold that person to account and bring light to the issue rather than simply go for the ratings. And to me, it is so reminiscent of Fox, and it's really hard not to see this as CNN just positioning itself as a business matter. And that's where, yes, it could have potential legal ramifications, but worse than that, if you don't have responsible journalism covering this upcoming election, we are so dangerously close to losing our democracy to an autocrat. And the fourth estate has to rise above just considering its business interests.
Donna, I spoke to a former senior national security official who had served under Democratic and Republican presidents, had worked in the highest levels of national security for Democrats and Republicans. And he said to me, I spent my career learning how to, sort of bob and weave with the changing politics of a new administration. But I never had to contend with someone who, at a time of active war, took the enemy's side. Right, so in this case, that would be Russia. Trump did not take Ukraine's side when asked about the war between Russia and Ukraine. So his autocratic, anti-free press, retaliatory embrace of practices around companies that don't fall in line, which is actually the patient zero to what DeSantis is trying to do with Disney in Florida, has an active, ongoing manifestation in that his instinct is to align himself and ally himself with Putin at a time of war.
Well, and in addition to not taking Ukraine's side at a time of war, he also would not acknowledge what virtually everyone does, that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. He simply can't do it. I mean, he will not ever find himself aligned with those who value democracy because he is an autocrat. I think what was startling to me last night was that not only these things with regard to Ukraine, but then when he said that he'd have it resolved in 24 hours, immediately I thought, oh my God, if this man becomes president, the way he's going to be resolving it is by giving away the store, the Ukraine store, to Vladimir Putin. So he presents a really scary model for what could happen if he returns to the White House. And I hope at least through this, we all can see what the future holds. And, I'm just disturbed because CNN really did not have to do this so far out of an election where a field is not even settled. And yet we have Donald Trump platformed in a way that projects him way ahead of other candidates and with a message that is, quite frankly, scary to the globe.
And just because we have the person here who prosecuted Paul Manafort, I mean, giving away Ukraine was very much on the table for the Trump team. I mean, we're not talking about hypotheticals. Jim Rutenberg has done some incredible reporting, and I know, Andrew, you know more, you've probably forgotten more about this story than any of us will ever really understand. But these are not what ifs. I mean, Trump's views and impulses are to leave our Article 5 obligations, to leave NATO, and to strengthen Vladimir Putin.
Absolutely. This goes way back in history. There's a reason that Putin did not want Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton and John McCain were completely tied at the hip and aligned with, frankly, at the time, Republican orthodoxy, which was Ukraine good, Russia bad, understanding that Ukraine was really the tip of the spear and was necessary to defend in order to not have what is happening right now. And the deal with Paul Manafort was the Russians explicitly reached out to him saying that they are trying to take over the eastern half of Ukraine, and they were looking to have Donald Trump give and this is a quote, a wink so that they could go forward with that. So this is long-standing on the part of Paul Manafort, but also with respect to what Russia was up to, and seeing Donald Trump as an ally. And everything that we're seeing and that you just talked about bears that out, where Donald Trump has always taken the side of Russia on every issue.
All right, no one's going anywhere. When we come back, we'll keep this conversation going. We'll also cover another Fox News defamation story, another lawsuit alleging defamation, this time from a former government official, accusing that network of deliberately spreading lies that harmed her career and threatened her safety. We'll have a chance to speak with her lawyer. And later in the program, screaming the quiet part out loud with a sitting you.
I do like what the commentator said whenever he said that the woman that supposedly went through the sexual betterment, that she basically had to victimize herself by putting her story out there to the American people. I kind of feel the same way, regarding all the stuff that has occurred in my life towards trying to promote the message from the Windmill Ministries missions of having to relive and be victimized again and again and again in some of the things that needed to be talked about and put out to the American public, not because I was reaching out for fame, but because the record needed to be cleared. Period.
That has managed to hold.
And if I didn't do that in my defense or in the defense of the ministry, I personally believe that
Trump's judgment is wrong in this case. President Putin.
I personally believe that that it never would have gotten cleared, not in this lifetime, not in this world. Yes, it would have gotten cleared in the lifetime to come, pertaining to the truth, what my motives was, etc., what I all went through pertaining to the 9 tapes in the Reagan era, etc. But it wouldn't have come true in this life, because I don't think nobody would have been able to have foreseen the truths in all that, in which what I was doing and putting out. And the fact of the matter is, we all are liable in what we say, not just in the eyes of the laws of the land, but in the laws of God. The Bible explicitly says that we're not supposed to get out here and basically be busybodies or be a bunch of gossipers and gossiping a bunch of stuff that you don't know to be certain or not. Because the Bible says that we will be judged by every utter word that we put out. So whenever a minister of any sort or a Christian person that knowing that the information that they're putting out to their congregation or to their base is lies, they will be held accountable one day in the eyes of God because of them saying what they said. Period. Absolutely period. I've looked at the deal with Donald J. Trump. I've looked at the laws pertaining to all the federal laws. There was only one other law that exceeded a 5-year statutory law, which was the law of art. Stealing art, you can be held accountable for that for up to 10 years. And of course, we all know that murder don't have a statute of limitations. But because of what that lady has done in the time frame that she done it, in Donald J. Trump's mind, he's thinking that she's whacked. And to think that they jumped on that in New York, knowing that they was in violation of the laws like that, and then them compile another charge on top of him of defamation. It's like, how come there's nobody judging the law in regards towards the law themselves breaking the law? Because I know for a fact that you have statute of limitations. You have statute of limitations on various laws, and even if you went out here and robbed a bank and you got away with it, 5 years later, you can actually get out here and announce it. I was the one who robbed a bank. I wouldn't suggest anybody doing that, but I'm just saying that there is guardrails within the law, that if the law itself ain't willing to abide by those guardrails, then it becomes a free-for-all. And that's what we're seeing on not only Fox, but we're seeing that basically with all journalists that basically want to get out here and rev up their base. And to me, that's not what true journalism is supposed to be about. True journalism is supposed to be about the subject matter that you're talking about. Now, just within the past 15 minutes, whenever you was listening to this, they jumped around to about 3 different subjects. They jumped around for 3 different subjects, which makes it that much more complex towards anybody listening to them and try to figure out what the heck they're talking about.
It obviously shows what we've experienced over the last 4 years and where we are right now. Look, I mean, that was one of the worst moments, but there were so many actually more egregious things. You know, Donald Trump last night called a black police officer a thug. He endorsed defaulting, United States defaulting on its debt, creating an economic cataclysm. He defamed a woman that he sexually assaulted, and then of course he continued his bromance with Vladimir Putin. This is what the Republican Party is facing, and as we sit here, he has a 40 percentage point lead on his nearest rival. It's always interesting to hear people like Senator Young say that they're not going to support him, but at this point, that feels like an outlier, because one after another.
Donald Trump is off whenever it comes to him supporting Putin. Donald Trump is not off whenever it comes to taking our national debt and trying to figure out what we're going to do with it today versus inevitably figuring out what we're going to have to do with it tomorrow, because we have already went through that threshold of the point of no return to where something obviously is going to have to happen to the American debt, because it is creating such of a unbearable beast of burden upon the people. So it's hit and miss with Donald Trump. You got to look at what he says, why he says it. The woman that brought forth these charges, to me, it is wacky. It's wacky that anybody could have brought up a charge after this length of time, and there's never been no type of paperwork pertaining to the original incident to begin with. And how come that they done that and went with that up there in New York City? It shows me the inadequacies of the law. But then again, I can look at what has went on in my personal life whenever I come back to Western Tennessee here in Weakley County, and I can see the inadequacies in what that I felt like was dereliction of duty, especially whenever it comes to the death of somebody. And then whenever I compound that with another individual that died, and basically they wasn't even willing to help the family out with the burial expenses, it makes me believe that the whole shooting combat has turned into a mockery. It's turned into a mockery. Those that they want to go after, they go after, and those that they don't want to go after, they don't go after. And I can use Jimmy Swaggart and Bill Clinton as an open example in public domain that Jimmy Swaggart done what he done, and he shouldn't have done what he done, and they tried to crucify the man. On the other hand, the President of the United States done what he done. He shouldn't have done what he done. And instead of them persecuting him like they did Jimmy Swaggart, actually people made money off of that ordeal.
Watch some of it.
And they was both embarrassing ordeals. They was both embarrassing ordeals. And because of that, it has put forth a bitter pill here in America that has taken people's lives and turned it around to the degree that now there's so many children that don't know up from down, they don't know right from wrong. And then if you'll feed that on top of the computer with the internet, social media, artificial intelligence, pertaining to smartphone technology, you've got a free-for-all. A free-for-all.
And about the role of the press, he says, a popular government without popular information or the means to acquire it is but a prologue to a farce or tragedy, perhaps both. There's a direct relationship between the sovereignty of the people and the free press. The free press that allows us to gather information so that we can engage in self-rule. But when the press is motivated by money, greed, ratings, it compromises its position. And suddenly, not only do we have a gerrymandered House, not only do we have a broken deliberative body in the Senate, not only do we have a compromised court, not only do we have an imperial presidency, but the fourth estate is failing to do its job. And that's a crisis beyond crisis, right? We're on a knife's edge.
I think that's exactly right, Donna. Another thing Mr. Zaslav says in that CNBC interview is he says we're not advocacy. But to take Eddie's diagnosis of what threatens us, it's not advocacy. I mean, what brought down Fox, what cost it $800 million, wasn't its decades of advocacy on behalf of Republicans and Republican causes. They were humming along. What brought them down is knowingly publishing falsities with actual malice. So the slippery slope that CNN stands on today is when it looks at these numbers, when Trump certainly reaches out himself or through a surrogate and says, let's do it again. This is a win-win, guys. What do they do next?
Well, I think that's the question, although I think we know what they've done now. And there's nothing that we saw last night that CNN did not know was going to happen. We all knew it, and they knew it too, and they decided to go forward anyway. We had already heard in the rallies that Trump has had, where he continues to do the election denying and defamation against E. Jean Carroll and all the lies. And so it isn't as though they weren't aware of it and they decided to do it anyway. And so I don't see what their rationale for not making.
Now you go from intent to willful intent. That's where that throws that over the curve.
What might happen, although I think Andrew is right, the law and the courts are really not an appropriate venue right now to police this in the context of the current election. It has to be dependent on a stronger fourth estate, as Eddie has said, to be able to do that and to hold him to account, and not to try to do it in real time. I think at some point Caitlin just got exhausted the way all of us were exhausted by being run over top of. And so that's not possible. Figuring out the right format and the right way to cover Trump, I think, is the challenge.
Right. I mean, fact-checking Trump in a live context is like asking someone being dragged behind a car to run. I mean, you can't run fast enough to keep up with a car. Andrew Weissman, there's some news that just broke in the New York Times about something we talked about and asked about. It's now on the record from E. Jean Carroll's attorney, Robbie Kaplan. She says this, quote, everything is on the table in terms of E. Jean's legal options. She describes Trump's comments about her client as, quote, vile.
Well, it's worth remembering, E. Jean Carroll actually brought 2 cases, and there is another case pending before Judge Kaplan. Judge Kaplan also has jurisdiction over Donald Trump. Those are things that are on the table. How CNN behaves going forward is on the table, as it would be with respect to any news organization, whether it's Fox or whether it's an individual like Donald Trump. So that's all fair. The one sort of optimistic note I will mention, since this is quite a pessimistic, rightly so, series of questions and that we're going over, is if you're Jack Smith, last night was a good night. Donald Trump, there's a reason Donald Trump did not testify in the E. Jean Carroll case and would never testify. There's a reason that Donald Trump did not come in to be interviewed by Robert Mueller. He is incapable of telling a consistent, truthful story. And that's why he can say now, oh, this was unfair, when he had every opportunity to testify in the E. Jean Carroll case. And when he was pontificating last night, he said a number of things that are just very damaging to future criminal cases, whether it's his embracing January 6th and the people there. That's good.
That was another thing that Donald Trump messed up on, towards embracing the January 6th deal, that he's going to basically get out of jail free cards if he becomes president. We have a conflict of interest in this country pertaining to a whole lot of stuff that's being said and done. And it's not just coming from one particular individual, though it's the one individual that basically was the mastermind of all this, that was the man in behind the curtain, per se. But we've got a lot of issues pertaining to newsworthiness of honesty, integrity, that I feel like America has lost a footing. It has lost a footing whenever it comes to the free, fair press but it's lost a footing pertaining to the trust of the people. And whenever a society like America has lost its trueness, then it can be slam dunked, twisted, rolled around, run over, manipulated in any form and fashion. And you know where that began? With all honesty, you know where that began? It just didn't begin with Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, the guy that said something about the news that he was taking on bullets or whatever, our missiles firing at his plane. That basically costed him his position. But the whole ordeal began during the Reagan and the Bush era, that wanted to spew out in one side of their mouths, oh, why change horses in the middle of streams? They never was on the white horse. I mean, whenever you have a judge looks at you pertaining to a Weakley County judge, Tommy Moore, while he's sitting in behind the bench, and he says, Juby, they don't think that you're the white horse. They think of you're the dark horse. Well, it's actually that same scenario, but it needs to be put on the right foot in regards towards this government. Because I really, if I would have thought for 1 second that I would have been incriminating myself by making the telephone calls that I was making in LBL that I know was being recorded pertaining to a darkly complected figure pertaining to Satan, because as far as I know, everybody knows that Satan is the enemy. As far as I know, most people knows that Satan is the 10 Commandment breaker of God. As far as I know, the things that motivates a rapist is Satan. The things that motivate somebody to lie is Satan. The things that motivate somebody to steal is Satan. The things that motivate somebody being unloyal to their parents is Satan. I could go down the line again and again and again. So these things I thought was obviously taken out of context whenever I had to stand in front of a federal judge and he was questioning my integrity about a Satan, about a Lucifer, about a physical Satan that is no longer just a spiritual Satan, but now is a physical Satan. Once more, you get into the denial thing. So many different people has been confused. They have been bamboozled, and now we've reached a pride thing to the point that they're not willing to come clean because of it, which takes it out of the category of what I have said before on some of my other videos, that a good person can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit to it. There's no longer hardly any people that's willing to admit to their mistakes. And because of it, that means that their integrity, their trueness is fake and false. And I guarantee you, the Heavenly Father knows if you're sincere or not pertaining to your relationship with Him. And just like the Bible says, you can tell the tree by the fruit that it bears. It's very obvious for the past 30 plus years here in America, we have steered off course. Now the next question is, when, how, where, and etc. that needs to be asked. These people in Northwest Tennessee had just as much sense, if not more sense, than what I was supposed to have had in reading the Bible and translating it properly. They didn't want to support a ministry that supported peace. That's the bottom line. And because of it, it has put us where we are today. Just like the federal judge up there in Paducah, Kentucky. And it was only there towards the last, and I've got proof of this, I've got it all documented. It was there towards the last that he started opening up his eyes towards realizing, well, yeah, we don't support the rapist. Well, yeah, we don't support the murderer. Well, yeah, we don't support the thief or the criminal that gets out here and wants to break the laws. Why is that? Because our laws is established under the 10 Commandments. thou shalt not kill. You get out here and murder somebody, you're going to be held accountable for those actions. The same way with the theft, a thief. You get out here and start stealing a bunch of stuff, you're going to be held accountable to your actions.
Can and cannot say.
Jankowicz is obviously a far-left radical Democrat who believes her opinions are facts and your opinions are disinformation.
She's wildly inadequate for the job.
She obviously wants us to, like, I don't know, emulate a European-style model of heavy regulation of internet content deemed harmful and dangerous.
It's unbelievable, right? Well, now it's the subject of this new lawsuit, and it claims that after Jankowicz resigned, quote, Tucker Carlson and Jesse Waters lied that she was fired from her post at the board, when in fact they both knew that Jankowicz resigned due to harassment arising from Fox's defamation of her. Joining us now, one of the attorneys representing Nina Jankowicz, Riley Summers Flanagan, and our friend NPR News media correspondent David Folkenflik is back. Riley, take us through the lawsuit that has been filed, the defamation suit that's been filed against Fox.
Yeah, so we represent Nina Jankowicz in her lawsuit against Fox News, and basically the way that this lawsuit works is that it's just like anyone else. You can't choose to come out and villainize and attack people with lies when you have the megaphone. Nina Jankowicz was the target of Fox's complete tirade, and their decision was to go after her, no holds barred. Their view was clearly that it was good for their ratings. And despite the fact that information came out that contradicted their narrative, they never changed that narrative.
See, if you're in there to do this for the ratings, you're in there for the wrong motives to begin with. The wrong motives.
And at the end of the day, it's our job to make sure that Fox News doesn't get a free pass when it engages in that type of disinformation.
Riley, let me show our viewers a human being between all this. This is an interview that my colleague Chris Hayes did on May 18th of last year.
Every characterization of the board that you've heard up until now has been incorrect. And frankly, it's kind of ironic that the board itself was taken over by disinformation when it was meant to fight it. It wasn't just, these mischaracterizations of my work, but it was death threats against my family. Over the last 3 weeks, I have maybe had 1 or 2 days I didn't report a violent threat, something like, we're coming for you and your family should be sent to Russia to be killed, encouragement of me to commit suicide. All of those have been forwarded to the Department of Homeland Security's security services, and that's not something that is American.
There's a horrible pattern here. I mean, it reminded me of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss's testimony in the January 6 hearings. It reminded me of Dominion's CEO. It reminded me of the calls played as part of the discovery process. Just tell us how strong you feel your case is against Fox, Riley.
We feel that this case is incredibly strong because of certain specific actionable statements that Fox News made about Nina. You highlighted one of them early in the segment, the decision that Tucker Carlson and Jesse Waters made to repeatedly come out and say that she had been fired when they knew and had even referred to the fact that she had resigned earlier. And not only that, they were fully aware that the reason that Nina had resigned was precisely because of the extraordinary torrent of disinformation that they had reported about her, and which had in turn elicited a violent response across platforms. She was receiving death threats. She was being encouraged, as she mentions in that interview, to commit suicide. She was and these particular communications, they were all arising from the disinformation that Fox was trafficking in, and doing so on purpose. The question about sort of why would they take this line? You know, I think that Fox News' culture has really lent itself to an effort to go after individuals, and particularly in the disinformation space, because they see themselves as having no consequences there. And I hope that the Dominion lawsuit really illustrates that that's not the case. But I also think that cases like this are a dime a dozen, because Fox News has been out talking about people in ways that are defamatory for far too long.
Yeah, I mean, David, there used to be a rare case, right? Now it's their bread and butter. They find sometimes an obscure person in the bureaucracy, and they seek to reputationally annihilate them. And it is more the anomaly than it always leads to threats of violence.
It's a way to destroy a person's character. And that's exactly what they started out in my particular life in 1983, after an automobile rode over on top of me, and my father tried to finish me off, and I went to Kenton, Tennessee, in trying to get some sort of help. And the type of help that I got was being institutionalized and being studied. That tells you right there that the law has become insensitive to the realization of people breaking the law, especially whenever the law picks and chooses towards who they're going to punish and who they're not going to punish. And I know for a fact that there's been certain people that, because they had, per se, deep pockets, or they was a very influential person in the community, that should have got the 3rd degree. Instead of getting the 3rd degree, they barely got a slap on the back of the hand. Especially whenever it comes to law enforcement basically becoming so dirty that law enforcement now is protecting the lawbreakers that's associated with the law enforcement communities. And I'll just put an illustration on that real quick. There was a sheriff in Gibson County that got caught. Him and his secretary and 2 or 3 others, I think, was involved in it. And the way that I understood it, that if it had been the average old Joe, they'd have probably wound up getting, I'm going to say, probably 10 years. But instead, he only got probation for 10 years. He had to pay a heavy fine, and then he walked. He didn't do no time. Why was that? It's based upon the law protecting the law in breaking the law. That's what it's based upon. Immunity. How come, if you're a judge or you're a sheriff or you're somebody else that's associated with the law, how come you're under some sort of immunity clause that you're not to be punished near as harshly as it would have been somebody that was off the streets? To me, it's just the opposite of the way that it should be, because I refrain back to Jimmy Swaggart's ministry, that they was going to crucify that poor guy because he was a preacher and he was preaching against the various stuff that he himself was doing. Well, it's the same way with a judge or a sheriff or anybody associated with the law. If you're associated with the law, you should get twice the amount of punishment, because you are part of that system. You're part of the law. And if anybody knows the law, you should be a part of that person that knows the law, because you're out here enforcing the law.
What we've learned, and we've known this for some years, is it's very tough to do good interviews. I think you saw good interviews from people like Jonathan Swan of Axios and Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes and Chris Wallace of Fox News, all because they taped interviews and fact-checked him after the fact and presenting it to the public.
Riley Summers Flanagan, David Folkenflik, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. A quick break for us. We'll be right back.
There you go. Quicker now.
I personally believe it goes back to the hases and the has-nots. That if you've got a little bit of something, if you've got a big farm, or if you got a business, or if you inherited some money and you can afford the top-notch attorneys, are the ones that's clever with their words or whatever, the silver tongue talkers, odds are you're going to get off almost scot-free, to where if it was the other person that didn't have the deep pockets, that couldn't afford that kind of help, he gets the third degree, or she gets the third degree. And that's where we're at here in America. Towards some people gets punished severely, while others don't hardly get punished at all. This is not what justice is supposed to be about. Not fair justice. Whenever you have the law that is this misguided, then you no longer have a democracy based upon just that in and of itself. It's really sad in how far that we have gone from the right over to the left. And I continue to say that the core of origin began right here in Northwest Tennessee. And I'm going to continue to stick to my guns, metaphorically speaking, that it began in the late 80s, whenever a spiritual awakening or revelation happened in my life that I was willing to share with the White House at that time, but the White House wasn't willing to share it with the people. Now, the White House wanted to act upon that event, that revelation, towards telling the superpowers, oh, we're not going to destroy one another with a nuclear bomb. The world's going to be destroyed the way that God has predicted for the world to be destroyed. But yet, no, they wasn't willing to help or promote the very person that had the message to begin with, pertaining to the Satan and the two witnesses and the opening of the first seal pertaining to the first horseman, and the end time events pertaining to the two witnesses that have come together in the doomsday devil's duel, where the temple is being built, etc., etc., etc. They wasn't willing to take that to that level. And as far as I know, 30 plus years later, I'm still here making these tapes. I'm still telling and talking about my story that I can prove, but I still don't have actual validation towards people that's in behind the ministry. So that tells me, proof is in the pudding, that tells me that whenever they talk about peace, they don't want peace. They don't want a windmill peace. They don't want a true godly peace. They want an artificial peace. They want a generic peace. And what did Jesus say about salt? That if it's lost its potency, that you just as well walk on it, and that it ain't no good other than to be trampled upon. There's where we're at. There's exactly where we're at as an American institution over here in America. That is where we're at. And it's so sad, because we're talking about grown-ups. We're talking about people that know better, that continues to keep making the same mistakes again and again and again. This individual right here, because he become homeless, his life was taken.
Be right back.
I'm adding Downey Unstoppable.
His life was taken, and the people that is causing disruptions with the area where he was killed at, I guess it was in the subway system in New York, now they're raising Cain and arresting people because they're affecting their jobs. They're affecting people's lives. Well, once more, if the law was to be the law that the law is supposed to be, the people wouldn't have to take the measures that they take. That's what they was hoping for out here in Weakley County at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. They was hoping that my brother and I would do their jobs for them up in Dresden, knowing that if we did, we would be shooting ourselves in the foot. So the only thing that we could do at that point in time was to grin and bear it. And that's what we done. to some degree. But at the same time, we're still human. We're not a rock. We're not a stone. We're not a piece of wood. We still have emotions. We still have feelings. And it was so overwhelming to my brother that it helped put him in an early grave. Emotions are real. The invisible sickness that our military soldiers come back with pertaining to our veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder are real. A person that gets engaged in some sort of major activity like a school shooting or a bad accident and they have problems of climbing back into that automobile, those feelings are real. Though you can't see them, you can't taste them, a lot of times you can't hear them, but they're there, and we know that they're there. It is so sad in how America has been bamboozled. They have been hoodwinked. Talk about revelation deniers, talk about Juby deniers, talk about election deniers, talk about environmental deniers. Well, you wonder how come Russia, the main president over, President Putin, continues to keep saying, we was cheated, we was cheated, we was cheated. Well, whenever you have a group of people that has pulled to the left instead of the right, no wonder they feel like that they got cheated. But the thing about it is, it wasn't just the Russians that got cheated. It was all of us that got cheated. And the true Christians to this day are still being cheated, unless you got a group of people in behind you. And they're dead set that they're not going to support me because I guess they see my message as it being a radical. The thing about it is, they're confusing me with the subject matter that I'm preaching on. It's called stereotyping.
Our readiness in terms of recruitment. And why? I can tell you why. Because the Democrats are attacking our military, saying we need to get out the white extremists, the white nationalists, people that don't believe in our agenda as Joe Biden agenda. They're destroying it.
You mentioned the Biden administration trying to prevent white nationalists from being in the military. Do you believe they should allow white nationalists in the military?
Well, they call them that. I call them Americans.
For the record, that's a yes. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. What is today's Republican Party, right? What does it stand for? What does it really believe in the year 2023? That's what. Standing up for white nationalists, not just standing up for them, saying they belong in the military. They're, quote,
let's go to national.
New fencing going up outside of Juarez, and that massive crowd of migrants by the border wall waiting days to be processed, finally rounded up and put in single file lines. The Biden administration trying to combat rumors spreading on social media that the end of Title 42 means a free-for-all.
I want to be very clear. Our borders are not open. People who cross our border unlawfully and without a legal basis to remain will be promptly processed and removed.
On Facebook and TikTok, hashtags in Spanish discussing Title 42 fueling the confusion. The New York Times reporting one video seen more than 96 million times falsely claims May 11th, you cannot be deported. Title 42 comes to an end.
What did you hear on social media about the end of Title 42 and what would happen on May 11th?
In Wayner Carcamo from Nicaragua told me he saw on Facebook misleading information about the change in policy that migrants would no longer be deported. Those rumors helping fuel the massive surge in illegal border crossings. DHS officials say a record high, more than 11,000 migrants were stopped by Border Patrol on Wednesday. A similar situation on Tuesday, when 17% were turned back because of Title 42. But the vast majority, 83% of migrants, were released into the U.S. to make asylum claims.
I really don't think that all these people should be let in. I really don't.
Republicans tonight blaming White House policies for sparking the chaos.
Joe Biden has decided he wants an open border where anybody can come across the border. This is despicable what he's doing to American citizens.
Border towns feeling the surge. Migrants arriving from Laredo, Texas, to Yuma, Arizona, to San Diego, California.
I understand that everybody wants a better future, but They're taking our taxes, they're taking everything from us.
Julissa Garcia lives in El Paso. She has 4 children and says her city is overwhelmed. She's worried about the safety of her kids.
They're using Moorhead Middle School as an
A shelter?
like a shelter for the immigrants, and I think it's unsafe for my children because I have 3 of them next door on the other school. So
Yeah, so it concerns you as a mom.
yes, it does.
But others who were immigrants themselves trying to help, remembering what it's like to have nothing and start from scratch.
You just donated a bag of food. Why'd you do that?
They're poor and they need to eat. I need to help. I like helping and I have a good heart. And I feel more for the children.
Tom, let me circle back to this misinformation being seen on social media. What's the White House telling you about how they're combating this?
Yeah, well, Lester, look, these migrants in many ways, they're fooled by the coyotes that are smuggling them in. And on top of that, they're desperate, right? So they want to believe whatever they see on social media. I just got off the phone with a White House official who says that's one of the reasons they created that app, right? So now these migrants who are applying for an appointment to seek asylum can get on the app. They can also get the information in Spanish. They can understand what the rules are and not believe that misinformation that is spreading like wildfire. Lester?
All right, Tom Yamas, thank you. Don't miss Top Story on News Now tonight. The situation at the border is straining resources across the country as migrants are sent to cities hundreds of miles away. Gabe Gutierrez reports.
Tonight, the migrant crisis is stretching far beyond the southern border. From Chicago, where immigrants are sleeping in a police station, to Denver, where they're packing into this parking garage and overwhelming this intake center.
There's nowhere else for these refugees to go.
New buses of migrants also arriving in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., so-called sanctuary cities where local authorities have said they won't enforce federal immigration laws. Here in New York, Mayor Eric Adams is now sparring with the suburbs as he blames the Biden administration for the city running out of shelter space.
The national government has turned its back on New York City.
As the city receives up to 1,000 migrants a day, a plan to bus migrants to 2 surrounding counties has now sparked fierce backlash.
I think it was an ambush.
Did you feel blindsided?
Yes, I felt disrespected.
Teresa Kenny is the supervisor of Orangetown, New York, a quiet suburb some 25 miles north of Manhattan.
Is this a case of not in my backyard?
No. We have zoning laws because things are appropriate in appropriate locations. That's appropriate for a hotel. It's not appropriate for a homeless center, which will have up to 340 single adult males put in it suddenly.
So local officials have gotten a temporary restraining order, even posting these sheriff's department vehicles outside of this hotel to prevent migrants from being bussed in.
He doesn't know what to do with, and we don't want him up here. We're not a sanctuary city.
Today, in a neighboring county, the first migrant buses arrived. While in the city, emergency shelters like this one at a 1,300-room hotel just steps from Times Square are overflowing. This woman from Colombia tells us at first the conditions were rough, but they've gotten better. She's now been here 5 months. New York City budget officials estimate that by next year, caring for migrants, including housing them at hotels like this one, will cost taxpayers more than $4 billion. Lester?
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. There is breaking news now in the chokehold death of a homeless man on the New York subway. The former Marine who held him down is set to be charged. Stephanie Gosk is following the story. What do we know about the charges, Steph?
That's right, Lester. The 24-year-old former Marine Daniel Penny will face a single manslaughter in the second-degree charge, according to the district attorney, who says he will be arraigned tomorrow. This is a charge that carries a maximum sentence of up to 15 years in prison, and it's used when someone recklessly causes the death of someone else. Now, Neely's death has triggered protests and calls for criminal charges in this city. The most recent, a protest on the subway that shut down a subway line over the weekend. Meanwhile, Daniel Penny's attorney says that his client acted in self-defense that day and that he and other riders on that train were, quote, aggressively threatened by Jordan Neely. We reached out to that attorney for further comment tonight and have not heard back. Lester, our sources had told us that the grand jury was going to review this case, but this news tonight means the district attorney has decided to skip that process. Lester?
Yeah, things moving very quickly. All right, Stephanie, thank you. Tonight, 7 million people are at risk for severe weather, including tornadoes and large hail across the plains and lower Mississippi Valley. Tornado watches in effect through this evening. A surprising development and a mystery going back almost 20 years. The man considered the prime suspect in the death of Natalie Holloway will be extradited to the U.S. on fraud and extortion charges. Here's Kristen Dahlgren.
Tonight, Natalie Holloway's family hoping to finally get some justice for the 18-year-old who was on a high school graduation trip to Aruba when she vanished in 2005.
There is still no sign of American Natalie Holloway.
In a case that made headlines around the world, Bjorn Vandersloot, who police say left a club with Natalie the night she was last seen, can now be extradited to the U.S. To face federal charges, he tried to extort $250,000 from the teen's mother in 2010. Vandersloot was never charged in Holloway's disappearance, but is currently serving a 28-year sentence after pleading guilty to killing Stephanie Flores in Peru on the 5-year anniversary of Holloway's disappearance. That country's new president now agreeing to the temporary extradition. Joyce Vance is the former U.S. attorney who signed Vandersloot's indictment back in 2010.
Without a body, a murder prosecution wasn't possible. It may never be possible. But this is still a form of justice for Natalie Holloway.
Vandersloot is accused of offering to tell Natalie's family how she died and where she was buried in exchange for the money. Authorities say he was given an initial payment of $25,000.
He took her attorney to a site he said the body was located at, but the body wasn't there, and he subsequently acknowledged that in emails.
An attorney for Vandersloot tells the Associated Press they will fight extradition. But in a statement, Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, wrote in part, "The persistence of many is going to pay off. Together, we are finally getting justice for Natalie." Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, New York.
After that town hall with Donald Trump, the woman who sued him and won a $5 million verdict against him this week is considering a new defamation suit. Here's Garrett Hake.
Former President Donald Trump.
Former President Trump's first televised town hall of the 2024 campaign tonight, potentially creating new legal and political challenges for the Republican frontrunner, with an attorney for E. Jean Carroll telling the New York Times she may sue Mr. Trump for defamation again over his latest attacks.
I have no idea who this is a fake story, made up story. I have no idea who the hell. She's a whack job.
Just 2 days after a jury found Mr. Trump liable for sexually abusing Miss Carroll in the mid-90s and for defaming her in his denials. And legal experts tell NBC News Mr. Trump may have complicated his own defense in the special counsel investigation into his handling of classified documents.
I'm going to stop right there. First of all, you see where all the confusion is coming from pertaining to the internet. Second of all, like I was talking about a while ago, Donald Trump has a way of spewing out things that his intentions is one way, but the public take it in another way. I truly believe that the reason why he calls this woman a whack job, it's not because she is retarded. It's not because she is mentally incapable of having her faculties. It's not because she is just basically wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and crazy in the things that she says and does. It's because of her actions that Donald Trump knows the law, that to think somebody would dig something like this up. And you know what? It's probably true. Donald Trump probably did have some sort of engagement with this lady years ago. And was it right? No, it wasn't right. Does it happen? Yes, it happens. But it isn't supposed to happen on the level that it's happening in digging up skeletons from years and years and years ago. So when does this end? When does this insanity end? It will end whenever the Christian society, the true Christian society, decides to put an end to it and come together in realizing the trickery and the damage is being done by our enemy, which is out to kill, steal, and destroy, according to the Luciferian Lucifer that is at large causing this problem. Problems all over the world. Not just one problem, but thousands, millions of problems that are now engaging, which once more is a prophecy in and of itself coming true, because the Bible talks about that whenever the opening of the first seal occurs, it talks about the woes, the first woe, the second woe. Actually, I don't even think King James mentions the first woe, but it goes into the second woe. So you know good and well if there was a second woe, there had to be a first woe. But it says that it was as the noise of thunder. That's engaging us where we are today with social media and all this satellite and internet and TV network stuff, that it would have been impossible for us to have gotten the noise of thunder. It was as the noise of thunder, the Bible says in Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, of the event that's happening on planet Earth, to the degree that one of the beasts in heaven looked over the edge of the platform in heaven, the floor or the wall or whatever, the domain in heaven, and said, for it was as the noise of thunder. One of the beasts said, come and see. What you are witnessing right now is biblical Bible prophecy coming true. Because in just about every incident, it's becoming a thunderous, roaring situation. Now, I want to go back to the innocent guy that was in the subway station in New York. And I'm not saying that his actions was innocent. Please listen to me. I'm saying that what happened to him did not deserve to happen to him. But it took a whole group of people to rise up before the district attorney was ever going to say, oh, wow, maybe I should do something about this. Now it's gotten on Frontline News. Well, what does that say about the law? It says that the law only wants to protect those that it deems protectable, and that's not how that our law is supposed to be in accordance of. I've just never seen so much chaoticness that's happening now all over the planet, especially here in America. And whenever you get to looking at all them illegal immigrants coming over here that's getting bad information, phony, fake information, misinformation, you know good and well what's causing that. I don't have to explain to you about social media and the internet and artificial intelligence. It's chaotic. And I've said in many of my other videos, we are under siege. We are under a spiritual siege that is now resonating into the physical form on earth. And if we don't watch, they're going to succeed in causing the destruction of humanity. And if that does happen, you will hear me again in the spirit world. And I will be telling you, I tried to tell you, I tried to warn you, I tried to give you a heads up. And I promise you right now, that's exactly what Noah is doing in his spirit world, of those that is trying to condemn God by saying, well, we wasn't warned, we wasn't given no heads up. Oh, yes, you was. Yes, you was. God sent a man to bring the word, the messenger of the message, and nobody wanted to listen to his message. So those that are falsely accusing God, that's exactly what it is. It is artificial charges that they do not have no credibility stand on towards blaming God because of the death that happened to them and their loved ones. And you know good and well it had to be just as devastating in their lives towards what went on during the Great Flood as it would be in our lives today if something like that was to occur, either on an independent small level or on a big level pertaining to an earthquake or a volcano or a flood or a hurricane or a tornado or fires. Those people's lives throughout the Bible are people's living lives. And those lives are just as much important as anybody else's life, even though they've already went through what they've went through. Just like that homeless person. That homeless person's life is just as important as a banker. It's just as important as the President of the United States. On a spiritual level. On a independent level. I don't know what the person done. I don't know how come he couldn't have been just basically neutralized to the point of maybe tying him up with a piece of duct tape or somebody taking their shirt off and putting a shirt over him or something to tie him down. I mean, if he'd done some drugs and he was that far out of hand and he couldn't be handled, he needed to be handled, but he didn't need to be killed in the process of being handled. But let's go back to what we're actually witnessing here. It took the DA, I think it's called the DA, the prosecuting attorney, this long before he's ever decided to go after the guy that actually killed the guy. That speaks volumes, my friends, about the law. Because it doesn't matter if it's a homeless person, it doesn't matter if it's a prostitute, it doesn't matter if it's somebody that's already generated a record for themselves, but they've paid their price to humanity, they've already done their time, they paid their price. It speaks volumes about the unfairness of the law, especially if you get to looking at what I know for a fact has went on around here in various people that has committed such heinous acts. One of them was over in Kenton, Tennessee, that had sex with his granddaughter, that basically got away with nothing, no punishment at all, because he owned the dealership over there in Kenton, Tennessee. There's been other extreme acts, sexual perverted acts that's happened with various farmers and various people around here that I know about, that was shoved under the rug. Kind of like catching the First Baptist minister drunk, and he should have got a DUI. That got swept under the rug. Kind of like some of the judges in some of their Christmas parties. It winds up in a ditch or winds up hitting a tree. That gets swept under the rug. It's not just Weakley County law enforcement that has become corrupt, in which I knew going back when Lewis Taylor tried to become the sheriff here. I knew back then how corrupt that the law was whenever it come to picking and choosing towards who it was going to punish and who it was going to let go. But it's that way all over the country, and it needs to stop. And if it doesn't, I'm just afraid the main stopper, which is God Almighty, may stop it for everybody. And whenever it does, like I said, you're going to hear my voice again. You're going to hear my voice in the spirit world, just like you're going to hear all the other prophets of God that tried to warn people, especially the Lord Jesus Christ. You're going to hear them in the spirit world telling you, we told you, we warned you, we gave you enough time to turn from your wicked and sinful ways, but you chose not to do that. So you can falsely accuse God all you want. You can try to make it hard on the messengers throughout history, in which they have. Trust me, if you'll read the Bible and read it properly, you'll see where they run them out of villages, you'll see where they arrested them, you'll see where they persecuted them, you'll see where they prosecuted them and killed them. Killed them. Because they wasn't going to have it. They was not going to hear somebody that was moved or touched or gifted by God in bringing forth a message. Well, in the meantime, you know who suffers? The whole bunch. All of them suffer. That's where we are today in the year 2023, that basically COVID has upset the apple cart, that has basically injected this into people's lives to where people are responding and reacting in a very, very obnoxious, cruel, and different way. And it's sad. It's really sad, because it starts at the White House. It went from the White House to the church house, to the church house, to the schoolhouse, to the schoolhouse, all the way down to the outhouse. In other words, it rolls downhill. but it starts somewhere. And the core of origin, beginning of where all this began in the Reagan era, began in the late 80s, that wanted to convince the superpowers, and it did convince the superpowers to a certain degree of ending the Cold War and starting the Pacific and the Atlantic alliances towards everybody working together. But in exchange of doing that, the American politician sold us downstream, even though somebody like Sam Walton stood on national TV and said, America first, America first. We will only sell America, 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 be built in America. Heard it myself, standing right beside George Walter Bush. The old man died. Things got tough. His own people basically stabbed the old man in the back. And then they started looking for other resources in other areas that was made a whole lot cheaper. That's whenever we started having factory after factory after factory after factory being shut down. That's whenever our children's future started being snipped out from underneath them, stolen from them. And it wasn't just one or two of the retail stores pertaining to somebody like Walmart, Big K, Kmart, Penny's, J.C. Penney's, or some of these other major corporations. But it was, I think probably about half of the equipment that we see in lawn services and some tractors, agriculture, they're not made here. Those tractors ain't made here. They're made overseas. Why? Because the labor was cheaper. In other words, the American politicians in the late 80s, they started selling us downstream. They got the cart in front of the horse. And how in the world could we compete in General Motors paying somebody $60 an hour of making the exact same automobile like they was making in Mexico and paying the people in Mexico only $8 an hour? You can't compete with that on a global level. And that's what happened to the American way of life. And if we're not willing to witness this and acknowledge this and then act upon to this, just like all the drugs, just like all the illegal immigrants, just like the $32 trillion that we're facing towards raising the debt ceiling, just like all the gun violence, just like all the other things, if we're not willing to sit down and discuss these things as adults, in understanding the core of origin towards where we went to the left whenever we should have went to the right, then we're not adults. And we're for darn sure not Christian adults. That was basically part of those deniers of denying, oh no, that's not how the rapture is going to take place. The rapture is going to take place whenever everybody's just going to instantaneously vanish and nobody's going to have to taste the bitterness of death. Well, that sounds good in theory. That sounds really, really good in theory. But in literal form, the Bible actually contradicts that. It says that it is appointed unto all men once to die and then the judgment. And whenever you get to looking at Revelations where it says again and again and again, be thou faithful unto death, be thou faithful unto death, be thou faithful unto death. Why did God put those things in there if we wasn't going to have to face death? Pertaining to the opening of the first seal. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us. I pray for our great nation. I pray for the leadership of this great nation. I pray for our military. I pray for the planet. I pray for the global society all over the planet. And I pray that Lord Jesus come quickly and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from this mortal, literal evil that has been subjected into people's lives illegitimately, that they should not be having to face our experience right now on any level, much less a painful level. God bless America.
and shalom.